It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a gathering of friends in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. A birthday celebration filled with laughter, games, and the warmth of familiar faces. Tamla Horsford, a vibrant mother of 5, was eager to join the festivities. She was known for her radiant smile, her infectious energy, and the love she poured into her family. That night, she kissed her children goodbye, assured them she'd see them the next morning, and drove off for what seemed like a well-deserved night of fun. The house was filled with voices and music, the sound of wine glasses clinking, and light-hearted conversations that carried into the early hours. Tamla, with her signature charisma, was at the center of it all, laughing, chatting, and enjoying the rare chance to unwind. But as the clock ticked into the early hours of November 4th, 2018, something changed. While most of the partygoers retired to their rooms or drifted off to sleep, Tamla stepped outside into the cool night air for what should have been an uneventful moment, a quiet cigarette under the stars. What happened next remains a mystery that has haunted her family, puzzled investigators, and ignited debates far beyond the boundaries of Forsyth County, Georgia. By sunrise, the lively mother of 5, who had been full of life just hours earlier, was found motionless in the backyard. Her body was marked with injuries that told a story far more complex than anyone expected. How does a celebration among friends end in tragedy? Why do the accounts of that night feel incomplete, disjointed, and at times contradictory? And how is it possible that years later, the details surrounding Tamla Horsford's final moments remain shrouded in uncertainty? This is the story of a night that was meant to bring joy, but instead left behind a trail of heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a family's relentless search for the truth. Tamla Horsford wasn't just a name in the headlines, she was a force of nature, a devoted wife, a mother to 5 children who looked to her for love and guidance, and a woman whose presence had the power to light up any room she entered. Tamla was the kind of person who left an impression. Her laughter was infectious, her energy unyielding, and her kindness unmatched. Those who knew her spoke of her warmth, her generosity, and her ability to bring people together, even in the most challenging of times. On the night of November 3rd, 2018, Tamla joined a group of friends at a suburban home in Forsyth County, Georgia, to celebrate a birthday. The gathering was casual, a small circle of acquaintances and friends coming together to unwind. For Tamla, it was a rare chance to relax, a brief escape from the demands of motherhood and the busy rhythm of her life. She arrived at the party dressed casually, her ever-present charm and lively spirit filling the room as she greeted everyone with her trademark smile. She was the only Black woman at the party, a fact that didn't go unnoticed by her family and would later take on deeper significance. In a community with a complicated history of racial tension, Tamla's presence stood out not because she was unwelcome, but because she was different. Yet, to her friends, she was the glue that brought people together, someone who made every gathering brighter just by being there. The evening unfolded like so many others: music, drinks, laughter. Tamla's voice, animated and full of life, could be heard over the hum of conversation as the guests played card games and toasted to the occasion. But as the hours slipped by and the party began to wind down, subtle details began to emerge, details that would later become critical pieces of a much larger puzzle. She wasn't ready to call it a night. Tamla was full of energy, her vibrant personality refusing to fade even as some guests retired to their rooms or began to doze off. She stayed awake, talking, laughing, and enjoying the rare chance to simply be herself, free from responsibilities. As the clock neared 1:30 a.m., she made the choice to step outside for a cigarette. A decision so small it seemed inconsequential at the time. But that moment, stepping through the door and into the cool Georgia night, would become the last time anyone remembered seeing her alive. Tamla's family would later reflect on the circumstances of that evening, questioning the very company she kept. How well did she truly know these people? Were they friends, acquaintances, or simply strangers passing through her life for a moment? The questions would only multiply in the days and weeks to come as the details of her final hours remained shrouded in mystery. For now, she was simply Tamla, a mother, a wife, and a woman full of life, walking out into the night with no reason to believe it would be her last. The hours stretched into the early morning. By 1:30 a.m., some guests were retreating to their rooms, leaving Tamla awake and still full of energy. Witnesses recalled seeing her step outside for a cigarette, her laughter trailing off into the night. But what happened after she left the safety of the living room remains a mystery. By sunrise, she was gone, her body found face down in the backyard, bruised and motionless. The sight was shocking, but the unanswered questions were even more so. How does someone fall to their death at a home full of people and no one hears a thing? Why were there gaps in the accounts of those who were present that night? When investigators first stepped onto the property that morning, the scene before them seemed deceptively simple. The backyard, bordered by a wooden fence, was quiet and still. The morning sun illuminated Tamla Horsford's body, lying face down on the grass beneath the balcony. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared to be an accident. Perhaps she had leaned too far over the edge or stumbled in the darkness. But as the officers began their work, details emerged that refused to fit neatly into that narrative. Tamla's body was positioned unnaturally for someone who had fallen from a height. Her arms were straight by her sides, her legs extended, as if she had been carefully placed rather than landing in the chaotic sprawl that typically follows a fall. Her injuries were another point of confusion. Multiple blunt force injuries were noted, including lacerations to her face and significant trauma to her head and neck. These weren't the kind of injuries one would expect from a simple tumble from a 14-foot deck. And then there were the abrasions on her wrists, marks that suggested something more, something that couldn't be explained by the fall alone. The balcony itself seemed to offer little in the way of answers. There were no scuff marks, no evidence of Tamla losing her balance, and no signs of struggle or disturbance. For all intents and purposes, it looked as though nothing had happened there at all. Yet, it was the place investigators identified as the point of the fall. Why did the physical evidence fail to align with the official conclusion? Inside the house, investigators spoke with the guests. They listened as each person recounted their version of the night. But the stories were inconsistent, fragmented. Some guests claimed they had gone to bed early, while others said they had stayed up drinking and talking until the early hours. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. No screams, no sound of a body hitting the ground. How could 10 people occupy the same space and yet fail to notice the very moment when Tamla's life ended? The 911 call that morning only added to the uncertainty. The calm demeanor of the caller, coupled with the lack of urgency in their voice, stood in stark contrast to the reality of what they had discovered. They mentioned the possibility of a fall but offered no clear explanation for how it might have happened. And while first responders worked to secure the scene, the lack of clear answers began to weigh heavily on Tamla's family. To those who knew her, the explanation provided by law enforcement didn't make sense. Tamla wasn't reckless. She wasn't someone who would carelessly lean over a balcony or lose her footing without reason. Her family, unwilling to accept the findings at face value, began their own search for answers. They enlisted private investigators to examine the evidence, hoping that fresh eyes might uncover the truth that seemed to be slipping away. The findings of those private investigators would deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Photographs from the scene appeared to show items moved between shots, raising questions about the integrity of the investigation. Certain injuries on Tamla's body, they argued, were inconsistent with the fall described by authorities. And while the toxicology report revealed alcohol in her system, it wasn't enough to account for the alleged recklessness that might lead to such a tragedy. The more they looked, the more questions arose. Why hadn't the balcony been thoroughly analyzed? Why were there no clear explanations for Tamla's wrist injuries? Why did the accounts of that night seem to shift with each retelling? And most importantly, why did it feel like the investigation had been closed before it had even truly begun? As whispers of doubt spread through the community, Tamla's case became more than a tragedy. It became a point of contention, a symbol of the questions that arise when the pieces of a story refuse to fit together. Her family, undeterred by the silence of the authorities, pressed on, determined to uncover the truth about what had happened on that quiet November night in Forsyth County. The call came in at 8:59 a.m. On the line was one of the party hosts, reporting an unthinkable discovery. Tamla Horsford, a guest who had been full of life just hours before, was now lying motionless in the backyard. The caller's voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm. "She's not breathing," they said, their tone lacking the urgency one might expect after such a discovery. "It looks like she fell." When first responders arrived, they were met with a perplexing scene. Tamla's body lay face down on the grass, her arms by her sides, her head turned slightly to the left. For a fall from the balcony, the positioning was unusual. Most falls result in a body landing with outstretched arms or some indication of an attempt to break the impact. But here, there were no such signs. The scene was quiet, almost untouched, as if the events of the night before had erased themselves entirely, leaving only questions in their wake. The initial reports stated that Tamla had likely fallen from the home's back deck, which was just over 14 feet high. A tragic accident, they called it. But Tamla's family wasn't convinced. They knew her strength, her coordination, her love for life. Could she really have been so careless, so unsteady, that she would slip and fall in such a way? And if she had, how could no one have heard her? As investigators began piecing together the night's events, inconsistencies started to emerge. The house was full of people, 10 guests to be exact, yet no one claimed to have seen or heard anything unusual. Conversations overlapped, timelines conflicted, and small details didn't seem to add up. Some guests reported going to bed early, while others said they were awake until the early morning hours. Yet somehow, no one could recall hearing a sound from the balcony or the yard below. The 911 call only deepened the mystery. The calm, detached tone of the caller raised eyebrows, especially when paired with the lack of panic in their words. "We were just getting up," they explained, "and she's out in the yard. She's not moving." There was no mention of rushing to her side, no visible signs of distress. It was as if the gravity of the situation hadn't fully registered. Or worse, as if it had been carefully controlled. Then there were the injuries. The autopsy revealed multiple blunt force injuries, including fractures to Tamla's wrist and lacerations on her face. Her head showed signs of impact, and her neck bore indications of trauma. These injuries seemed inconsistent with a simple fall, especially from a single-story balcony. Her family couldn't ignore the growing sense that something vital had been missed. The balcony itself became a focal point of suspicion. Despite being labeled the point of the fall, it had been poorly analyzed. There were no clear signs of Tamla slipping, no markings on the railing, and no obvious evidence to suggest how or why she might have fallen. And while toxicology reports revealed that Tamla had consumed alcohol that evening, her blood alcohol level wasn't excessive, certainly not enough to cause the kind of recklessness implied in the reports. As days turned into weeks, the questions only multiplied. How could someone fall to their death at a house full of people and no one notice? Why were the accounts of that night so fragmented, so incomplete? And most importantly, why did it feel like critical pieces of evidence were being overlooked? For Tamla's family, the answers were not coming fast enough. They began to push for more. A second look at the evidence, a deeper investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. But with every new discovery, the truth seemed to slip further from reach. Tamla Horsford had gone to a party as a guest, a friend, and a mother, hoping for a rare evening of relaxation. What she left behind was a mystery that would haunt those closest to her, and a community that would struggle to reconcile the unanswered questions surrounding her final moments. Public scrutiny only intensified as more details, or the lack thereof, came to light. Tamla's family hired a private investigator, whose findings pointed to potential mishandling of the case. Photographs taken at the scene seemed to show items moved between shots, including Tamla's body. Some guests at the party were reportedly reluctant to cooperate with additional questioning, and a key witness's statement contradicted the timeline initially provided to authorities. Then there was the troubling context of where this all occurred: Forsyth County, Georgia, a place with a long and complicated history of racial tension. Tamla's case, now under the spotlight, began to feel like more than just a tragedy. Was it negligence on the part of the investigators? Was crucial evidence overlooked? Or was the case closed too quickly in the interest of preserving reputation? These were the questions that fueled online forums and family statements, creating a growing movement that demanded justice for Tamla Horsford. Despite the questions and the growing public outcry, Tamla's case was officially ruled an accidental death. No charges were filed, no further investigation was pursued, and for many, the door seemed firmly shut. But for her family, friends, and supporters, the fight for answers is far from over. To them, the story of Tamla Horsford isn't just about one night. It's about systemic failures, unanswered questions, and a justice system that too often falls short. Years later, the events of that night still linger in the minds of those who hear Tamla's story. The backyard where she was found now stands as a silent reminder of a life cut tragically short, and a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. Her family continues to demand a re-examination of the evidence, hoping that one day the truth will emerge from the shadows. What do you think really happened that night? Was Tamla's death a tragic accident? Or is there more to this story that remains untold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more in-depth looks into the world's most chilling mysteries. And join us next time as we explore another case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.